right after I graduated Top Gun. I returned to the squadron, and at the time, the Navy was not having very very much success going kinetic in Afghanistan. So we had carriers that were operating in the North Arabian Sea that were flying long sorties up into Afghanistan, spending a lot of time on station, working with JTACs, not satisfying the ROE, and then having to return to the ship, only to hear an F-16 check on right after and get cleared hot. So some brainchild on the Navy staff at the Pentagon said, well, it's because the ground force commander doesn't know how to use Navy assets. If we take some Navy TAC air guys and stick them in with the Army, then they can use them. And so there were 10 of us that were picked, and I was the lucky one from my squadron that got to go. I guess they figured because I just finished Top Gun and was very proficient in air-to-air tactics that I'd be the perfect person. But I went through the Joint Firepower course at Nellis, and then went through the Navy. They have called NIACT. It's like the individual augmentee combat training. It was at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, where we got to run around the woods and play Army, driving Humvees and carrying M4s and doing that. And so we went to Fort Jackson, started communicating with the colonel that was in charge of all the JTACs and TACPs that were in Afghanistan, and he said, "Well, I don't know how to use you guys because doctrinally there isn't something called an air planner, which is what the Navy was calling us, air planners." So he said, "I'm going to use you as ALOs. You're all tactical. You all have JTAC experience, so we're gonna use you as air liaison officers and send you out with individual TACPs, different FOBs." So that's what we did. Because we're all warfighters. Whatever we need to do to support the mission. So we go over there, and I can still remember sitting in the talk one day. The ground force commander is talking about an upcoming operation, and he's like, "Air, what do we have available?" And I said, "Well, you've got a B-1 with 2 hours of on-station time, a couple Strike Eagles with, an hour and a half, F-16s with an hour, A-10s with an hour, and two Hornets with 20 minutes." And he goes, "Well, what do you want to use?" And I said, "Not the Hornets. I mean, I don't want just 20 minutes of on station time. I want to have something that's there and persistent." And so we quickly realized this experiment was not going to work. And the Navy leadership was like, "Hey, what's going on? How come we're still not seeing advantages?" Like, it doesn't make sense. The Navy Air Wing exists in an expeditionary role to basically be there until we have a permanent sustained presence. So does it really make sense to have guys flying from a carrier all the way up into Afghanistan only having 20 minutes? Or maybe should we det a squadron to Kandahar and have them fly out of there? But, so that experiment failed after that one deployment. But
it is interesting how it goes. I've talked about on the podcast other things. My last point to OIR, the F-22 started getting in the mix, and the F-22 was dropping bombs. The Russians showed up, and there's some argument for some air dominance and making sure they don't do anything crazy. But it's also kind of silly, in Rain's humble opinion, to have this 5th gen fighter dropping bombs without a targeting pod into an uncontested environment. Now, if it's contested and you got double-digit SAMs and you need it to break across the fence, sure, there's a discussion and an argument for that. But let's not use it on the softball targets. We can use Vipers and Hornets, etc., for that. The on-station time is always a factor, and that, I think that'll always be something for a Viper that's an issue, for probably a Hornet coming from the boat that's an issue.
Yeah, F-35.
Painful as it is, a Strike Eagle with just bags of gas and tons of bombs.
Yeah. You have to pick the platform for the mission, and I think there's a lot of infighting that goes on, at least among the flag, general officer level, where they want to prove that their assets can do the mission. And I don't think maybe they should in all cases.
Yeah, if you need to go somewhere in a matter of days and put air power and force project somewhere, turns out a boat with a bunch of Hornets on it, it's probably your Huckleberry.
Yeah.
It doesn't need a long runway and don't have to go take an airfield, but different tools in the tool bag for different problem sets depending on what presents itself.
Absolutely. And in a landlocked country like Afghanistan, I think that an argument could be made that once you have a sustained presence, and you have, fighters and strike aircraft that are based there, you should use those, and if you need more,
Yeah.
then debt more there. At least that was my belief. That was my opinion. But, I had a very, very granular view being on the ground and seeing, what I was seeing and knowing that, man, I love the Hornet, and honestly, my JTACs, they love the Hornet too. They said I would much rather, no offense, I would much rather pick a Hornet guy over a F-16 guy because it sounds like they're just kicked back in recliners, smoking a cigarette and having a drink when they're talking to you about ROE, and they're just very relaxed. And I take great pride in the fact that Hornet guys are pretty good at close air support, and are pretty relaxed at working with the JTACs on the ground, and they look to accomplish the mission. But if it's not the right asset, it's not the right asset.
Oh, you might have just cut out there for a second. I'll have to erase everything you just said about the Hornet, so it's fine. Yeah, it's a little blip. I think the post production it'll show up, but yeah, there's different tools. That's the strengths and weaknesses. There's always the argument that pops up. Yeah, like for instance, like the F-35 will never replace the A-10. Yeah, sure. Yeah, the A-10 is a close air support machine, but the A-10 is going to soak up a bunch of double-digit SAMs in about the first nanosecond of any like contested fight. So it's just knowing the strengths and weaknesses and using the right tool for the right problem.
Yeah.